Today we're going to tackle a big world problem, and that's not any hyperbole. We're tackling the U.S.-Iranian, shall we say, conflict in the Middle East. So, with that, I want to say, gentlemen, welcome to the show. Thank you for providing your insights, and let's kick it off with Gerry. You've got this wonderful series, right? Negotiating with tyrants, that you've been doing for a long time, and there are people on both sides of the aisle that will point to the other side and say they are the tyrant. Um, so,
Yep.
uh, and of course, we have third parties involved, lots of world leaders getting involved with this. So, please kick us off, Gerry.
All right, great. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Josh. Um, I want to start by saying that people think that Trump is the Uber negotiator, and I don't doubt his skills. He looks like he's been pretty successful, but he's got chinks in his armor too, just like all the rest of us do. And I think some of those chinks have been exposed in the Iran situation. And as you both know, I'm a big proponent or big fan of Lax and Sabinius, probably two people you know very well, Josh, from Harvard Business School.
Yep.
So I love those guys, and I love their 3D negotiating framework because I don't have to memorize anything. All these other negotiators out there, it's, you're memorizing scripts. He says this, you say that. And I just like a simple framework, and I just think it makes a lot of sense. So that's kind of the way I've been framing up negotiations in my mind and how I assess them and how I try to conduct them. When it's not haggling about the check at the, local restaurant or something.
Mm-hmm.
So what I've done is I've thought about this one and tried to frame it in the 3D framework of Lax and Sabinius. So if you ever see those guys, tell them they've got a great fan here in Chicago.
Well, they are
So
great guys. Yeah.
Well, I
I'd
will
love
say
to
this.
meet them
It, it,
someday. Or
it is nice that when somebody uses your stuff, it's one thing to, because we're all teachers here, there's one thing to teach, and then sometimes it just, goes one ear and they use it a little bit and then they go back to their day jobs. But to
Mhm.
hear that somebody's actively using a principle that you've created and taught, I think that's pretty cool. So
Yeah.
yeah, kudos to them.
Well, so anyway, the way I look at it is setup. What Trump did to kind of set up this Iran situation. And the way I looked at it is the first step he did was Syria, where he kind of disconnected Syria from Iran. And those two have been allies for many years. And, he was able to disconnect Syria from Iran. And so that was a loss of an Iran ally a long time before the war started. And then he went after Venezuela. And I'm not sitting here judging anything like this was the best thing or the worst thing. I'm just kind of
Yeah.
sizing up what I see here. And, I see Venezuela as part of this setup too, him going after Maduro and what he's done there. And thirdly, the Cuban oil blockade. So I think that all kind of was the setup leading to the Iran, what he did in Iran. But there was a fatal flaw in the design of the deal or of the war that Trump did. And that flaw was in bombing their enriched uranium. Just, I don't. He probably didn't wipe it out, but destroyed a significant portion of it because that's really the only thing that Iran had to trade. Is the only thing of value, and when you're a negotiator, you got to have something to trade. And
Okay.
if you blow up or destroy most of what they've got to trade, not a lot to trade. There's stuff, but that was a
Like what
big
the trade is, I'll
component.
promise not to do it again. And right.
Yeah,
And what's a promise
yeah.
worth? Right.
With the Iranians, I'm not sure that a promise is worth very much, just from what we've seen over the past 47
Right.
years.
Well, hold on.
But
We're all Americans here.
but
The
yeah,
states have fallen through on some of our commitments as well. Our Ukrainian friends,
right,
right?
you are.
What was I watched the thing on Netflix and it said there was this word guarantee versus assurance when the USSR fell apart.
Mhm.
And the US, there was haggling over the words in would Ukraine give up their weapons? And the word was, we will give you our assurance we will protect you.
Yeah.
And
Right.
now there's a whole thing going on there. So anyway, sorry,
Well,
back I
yeah, and
hijacked
I
that a little
mean,
bit.
and can I just say one quick thing about that, and then Jerry, if helpful if you continue. I do think that the trust element. I mean, again, look, these countries have not, gotten along for a very long time, and so there's a trust problem, and I think, uh, and I'm a big believer in negotiation. It's very hard to create trust in a negotiation, especially after 50 years, thinking that you're going to sit down and be able to do that. But I think when you have active distrust, there's another dimension that goes along with this, right? Which is what I think you really have. And I think some of that comes from a, you know, the way in which the Iranians negotiate. Sort of there's an ebbing and a flowing, there's commitments and, things that we can dig into a little bit deeper. But I also think that when Trump tore up the JCPOA, right, that was and there are varying accounts to how far and how much the Iranians were following along and doing what they said they were doing, versus trying to cut corners. I think that the answer to that question is pretty mixed. That they were doing probably about 75 to 80%, but they were also attempting to skirt some of the inspections and things along those lines. But then I also think that there's another challenge with this piece, which is, when is a ceasefire actually a ceasefire, right? So when we start, when the United States and Iran agreed to the ceasefire, Israel continued to bomb Lebanon, and then there was this question about, well, was Lebanon included or not? I think the point is just simply that there's been a lot of places where that trust has been further and further eroded to a point where it's really not, you're at a place, and to your point, Mike, where there's going to have to be guarantees if anything's going to happen because the trust level is so low. You're going to have to go back to the Reagan trust but verify on both sides, right? And there, words and commitments don't mean a ton here. Like there's going to have to be that element that's included.
Yeah. I-
I think it's a good point, and it's going to be difficult for all of these parties included
Yeah.
to have that trust. And why, and I have a question, why, this ceasefire did not include Israel. Maybe one of you guys knows better, but that was always a puzzle to me, like kind of why that wasn't wrapped up inside of that.
So
Now,
so
maybe
I
you
didn't
know, and if
I
you do,
didn't read
please
it.
let me know.
Again, I'm on holiday, but what I heard on the Sky News here was it wasn't US Iran, it was US Iran, Israel, Lebanon. Somehow they got included. But as importantly, the agreement was written in four different languages
Hmm.
so that each side could sell to their constituents that we didn't cave, we didn't lose, we got the other side to agree to our position. And when you write it in different languages, and I'm only speak U.S. English, but even U.S. to U.K. English is subtly off on some important things.
Well, and I also think, by the way, to your point, Jerry, I think this has been a bit of a, I don't want to say it's a fatal flaw, but it's a significant flaw in this process, which is there are a number of countries that are either directly involved, like Israel and Lebanon, or indirectly, like the Gulf states, China, Russia, that have not been at the table. And so I think one of the real challenges is that I think these different countries have different interests. And for example, I think Israel has a different goal than the United States. Yes, it's to short circuit Iran's nuclear efforts, but it's also about regime change. And I'm not so sure that the United States is fully on board with that idea. I don't really think they are. I mean, Trump has claimed that there's regime change, but going from one Ayatollah to the other and to his son is not regime change. And if you're talking about a theocratic regime that is firmly embedded and has been, there for 47 years, and at least 20 to 25% support the regime. If you have some kind of regime change in the future, right? One of the important questions, and I think lessons from the Iraq War and Afghanistan, are what happens to those people? And those people are typically going to become potentially, if in fact that were to play out where there was a significant change in regime, would become the next ISIS or Daesh or whatever, right? They're going to continue the guerrilla warfare as part of this process, which is I think one of the big challenges in my mind to all of this, which is really what's the end game? We know about the nuclear nonproliferation and things along those lines, but there's a much longer, much more complicated dimension here that I think is a very big part of the problem, which is, and I think this is what we saw Saudi a couple of weeks ago say to the United States, finish the job from a military point of view. And the fear, as I understood it, in talking to some colleagues who know kind of the Saudi position pretty well, is um, that they were worried that the United States would go in, quote unquote, break Iran and then just leave it in a broken regime with nothing really resolved other than the fact that there's been a lot of damage. And that for the players in the region is almost worse than some outcome in either direction, right? Because you have a wounded country that's had a propensity to do things that are very, very disabling over the years, right? And so I think that that's been a very big challenge. And the tie-in, Mike, between Israel and Lebanon, of course, is that Hezbollah was an Iranian proxy, and that Lebanon itself, like the government of Lebanon, and this is another interesting question for me, which is that the negotiations right now, are between Israel and the government of Lebanon, not Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is the issue, and the government of Lebanon has very little ability to wrangle in Hezbollah. It's frankly the opposite, right? That they have very little capability to do that at all. And Hezbollah has really been controlling Lebanon
Yeah.
for many decades, right? So there's a lot of places here in these negotiations where there are players who are not at the table, and the question is even, are there interests at the table? It's one thing, if the United States says, look, we'll represent Israel in these talks, okay. But if you have really different interests, you're not going to be fully representing things, and there's going to be a game of telephone about what really transpired and things along those lines.
So let's talk about the interests real quick. I
Yeah,
promise here. We've
that's fine.
got a lot of stuff to talk about. Guy that I connected with on when COVID happened, we did the negotiation-a-thon thing, and Shane Ray Martin is out there, and he was big in the negotiation space, and now he's shifted. He's into peace tech, using AI to develop peace, which is a wonderful aspiration. But then I go, who's making money off peace? Because there's a lot of money to be made off conflict and hate between the media and selling people watching the war on TV and the remanufacturing industry, making money off guns and bullets. So it's almost not really in anybody's best interest to have peace, which means a continued war. And that's separate from the religious angle. So we don't have to get religious on here, but we got 5,000 years dating back to Abraham of escalation, we'll call it. And we've got generations of future terrorists. You killed my father, and now as I grow up, so I really don't see a long-term plan for peace. As much as I would love for me to be wrong, I just see there's too much distrust, active distrust, and hate, and money to be made when there's conflict.
Well, I don't think there's any question about that. I think the money to be made from conflict is a pretty well documented notion, right? Sad as that may be. Look, I do think that the Middle East will be different. Like at the end of the day, there will be a different Middle East as a result of this. Now, I am very careful to be Nostradamus in the Middle East because it is a dangerous game and nobody really knows what it's going to look like, And I've done some interviews on this and they're like, well, what does it look like? And I'm like, I don't know. Nobody knows, especially because things are so in flux.
Well, do you think that someone's intelligence got the calculation wrong? That once the war started, that internally there would be regime change, that the moderates and their left would overthrow the regime internally, and we wouldn't have to do the dirty work. And that it hasn't fallen yet. And
I,
now
I,
we're
I
stuck.
think I think that was absolutely the hope. I think, if you go back to what George Bush said in Iraq, that we were going to be greeted as liberators, I think that mindset, it's hard for me to believe that that mindset still exists. But I think when President Trump came out and said to the Iranian people, now's your opportunity, that's in the backdrop of thousands of people having been killed by their own
Right.
government.
Right.
And so people were excited, etc. But if you talk to military experts, I'm not a military expert. I
Mhm.
have friends who, are savvy, etc. They say, regime change rarely, if ever, happens as a result of just bombing. It requires much, much more of a military kind of presence on the ground and things along those lines. And I think that was the problem here is that, first of all, bombings were continuing to happen. And so saying to people, go out and take your country back in the middle of bombing raids is there's a flaw in that logic,
Yeah.
right?
And
Um,
you take the people who might have been on the fence and you're
mhm.
bombing their country, and they go, "Hey, wait a minute.
Yeah,
You're bombing my brothers and sisters and uncles and aunts, and my
that's
kid
right.
died in the school. And
Yeah,
now you've shifted an ally to I'm going to support the regime, even though I don't like the regime."
you got it. I think that's exactly what's happened. And again, it's a bit of a stretch to think that people are going to be able to rise up in that way, especially against a regime who has cracked down on its own people,
Yeah.
right? So I think that the one place where I feel like there's an opportunity here, I don't think the opportunity is necessarily between the United States and Iran. I think the opportunity, and again, I'm trying to put up, sort of take the perspective of what could be different in a positive way. What could that look like? And this is going to take a lot of effort, but I think there's the potential for some kind of regional changes here, with the stepping in of, say, Saudi Arabia and other countries, and potentially also weaving in, Saudi's been pretty clear that any kind of solution here needs to protect them, but I think it also has to have some kind of connection to to help the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And my sense is that if you can get regional countries on board, the Abraham Accords um, certainly, knocked out a taboo of direct connections between Israel and other places, right?
Mhm.
So I don't think that there's a bilateral solution to this. I do think that if the region comes together, and I will say that it was, in my mind, promising to see Pakistan and Egypt and Turkey and Saudi serving as mediators and interlocutors. I think what that is in Bill Urey terminology is the third side trying to play a constructive role because the reality is that the Strait of Hormuz and that area has an impact on the global economy. So people aren't doing it simply for, there's some altruism, there's some recognition that, hey, this could go sideways very fast. But there's also people's own interests, right? I mean, the Trump administration has been chastising NATO allies and saying, you should be getting involved after he's insulted them and threatened to invade many people. And
Yeah, I'm in
yeah,
Spain right now. I mean, they shut down the
yeah,
airspace. They said, no,
right.
we're not going. Now he's talking about kicking him out of NATO. Well, you can't just
Right.
kick him out of NATO. That's not the way it works.
Right. But
But
also on top of that, um, you know, having that kind of relationship with countries and then turning around and expecting them to help you isn't really how the world works. I mean, it's just not, right? If I insult somebody, they're not going to turn around and go, "Oh, well, sure, we'll come help you." If European countries get involved, which they may, it's because it's in their interest to do it. It's not because they're wanting to come and help the United States,
right.
And that's the consequence of these kinds of, in my mind, these kinds of policies.
Well, and let's drive it back to what Jerry was talking about the planning. It's
Mhm.
quite possible that Trump and the administration looked at it and said, why is it always the U.S. primarily that's spending our weaponry,
Mhm.
our people, and we want to do it. So let's be honest. It's like, oh,
Right.
don't make us go to war. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, Trump is saying we have done this for years. We have been the leader for years. And when we ask for airspace, the expectation is you're going to participate too. It may not be to the same levels, but there is an expectation in a negotiation, in a long-term relationship, that somebody gets tired of carrying the load.
Hmm.
Just like, our families, our business partners, everybody in
Sure.
life, sometimes somebody just goes, man, you're not pulling your share.
Yeah.
That's not, use that F word, fair. But I'll wrap it back to what Gerry let us off with, was the planning for this, Gerry. So if there was a mad scientist lab that says, okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the Syria thing off the table. Then we're going to take Venezuela off the table. We're going to take Cuba off the table. We'll talk about Greenland. And so there's a lot of pieces that didn't look connected. And what I'm hearing you say, Gerry, is they may be all part of the plan for this one piece. Now, or this one piece is the next piece for the next thing. But please
Yep.
educate us.
Well, the Greenland thing, I, I don't know, if there's any, I doubt there's any connection at all to the Iran thing.
Probably more of
That's
a China
probably a
play.
whole different. Yeah.
Well, but I could offer you one thought on that really
Oh,
quick.
okay.
Actually, I think all of these have a thread, and the thread is resources. If you look at
Okay.
like the Trump
Yep.
administration, the first deal that they did with Ukraine, right? The first thing that they did with Ukraine was a
Yep.
minerals deal.
Yep. Yep.
Everything has been essentially about resources. Greenland is about resources, Venezuela clearly, etc. So I think there's a through thread here of resources that is driving these different actions.
No, that's a really good point. And I wanted to go back just quick to a point you made, Joshua,
Mhm.
about how will the Middle East look different in the next few years. And I just got to think that with the issues over the Strait of Hormuz, which has always been kind of a problem, it's settled for a long time, and then something will happen. And I think there'll be a reconfiguration of the delivery mechanisms of energy out of that region.
Hmm.
The Strait of Hormuz will probably always be a highway, if you will,
Hmm.
to energy. But I know I was chastised on LinkedIn by somebody about mentioning pipelines. But I think there'll probably be a lot more pipelines built to try to circumvent the reliance on the Strait of Hormuz. And that may not be a big thing in geopolitics, but I think it will. The transportation of resources is very important, and I don't think the world likes to be caught up in
Hmm.
a choke point like the Strait of Hormuz.
Hey,
So
the bankers in
how
London
that
do
plays
not
out
the
with all the countries.
they do not like to insure vessels in war zones.
Yep.
But
Yep.
there is, and the Gulf countries already do have pipelines, and there's
Yep.
more recent conversation about expanding those pipelines,
Mm-hmm.
just to your point, Jerry, to
Yep.
take some of that pressure off of that, scenario.
Yeah. But it's such an exposure
Yep.
point for bad actors. You take out one vessel, that's fine. There's 300 more waiting to take their place. You
Yeah,
take out one pipeline and forget the
sure.
ecological disaster, but it's just
Yeah.
sitting there and there's hundreds of miles of it and you
Hmm.
can't secure it all. You can put all the drones you want up, but or somebody can attack it with all the drones they want. It's just a very, sensitive
Yeah, yeah.
point.
Well, and to your
Yep.
point, Mike, I mean, these guys, it's easy enough to sit with some form of handheld, shoulder-held weapon and, along the strait or to if you're really wanting to sabotage those kind of things. So, right, from a security point of view, it's very, very challenging. And I do think, by the way, there's just always in the media, there's always this conversation about leverage, that people will spend lots of time talking about negotiation and leverage. And I think both sides sort of have it in different ways here. And I think this may have been a bit of a miscalculation on the Trump side. I mean, there's
Yeah.
no question that the United States, along with Israel, has a vastly superior military, when it comes to all of this. But I think that the shutting down of the Strait of Hormuz, like I'm sure that, and in fact, talking to some folks, they've gamed out that scenario, right? But the question is, it's a little bit like Vietnam, right? That yes, you have this vast military superiority, but guerrilla warfare and people hiding in the mountains and things like that can disrupt all kinds of things.
Okay.
And that's not, So it's an interesting question about leverage here. And I also think leverage only takes you so far, right? Because in many ways, it appears to me that both sides have leverage in different ways to kind of keep this going. And I think it's fair to say if you look at Iran's actions, um, they feel that way. They feel they have certain places of leverage here because they are not
Well, they don't
succumbing.
have an election, Josh.
Right. That's right. And that is a big pressure point
Their long
for the
game is
Trump
3 years.
administration.
They just have
Right. Correct.
it's the classic. It's Nixon transition from Johnson. It's Reagan transition from
Yeah.
Carter. There is a compelling event,
Right.
or there is an election issue to run on
Yeah.
to grab voters to switch regime change. Not that
Yeah.
both sides aren't a part of the same regime, but
Yeah.
but can all the ratings have to do really is wait it out for 3 years.
Well, and they are playing the long game. Like their, philosophy, the notion of Taruf, of playing the long game, of sort of this approach to sort of stretching things out, looking for pressure points and things along those lines. I mean, the parties are clearly playing different games. Trump is taking much more of a short-term pressure, red lines kind of thing. And the Iranians are, taking this longer view. And it's actually the same dynamic and same problem that the United States has with China, right? Xi is there. He doesn't have elections to deal with. And so he has the luxury of playing a much longer, drawn out game
Right.
where Trump
And
doesn't. And I
Putin
think
does.
and Putin
You know,
does as well, right?
Yep.
Anybody who's not duly elected, at least what many would consider free and fair elections, right, that are legitimate, has an added challenge. And I think Trump's biggest problem right now is his domestic issues, that he's looking and seeing that on a number of fronts, things are failing. And it's, a lot of it is a result of what's going on. And so he's getting tremendous domestic pressure to do something differently.
and he has been the president. Let's just put it this way: he covets the peace prize,
Mhm.
right? And all of a
He
sudden
does.
that has completely flip-flopped, and he ran on it. I want to have peace. I want to be the peace president. His first term didn't start a new war. Everybody's got
Yeah,
dirt under there, but a large part of his base voted for him because
absolutely.
he wasn't the pro-war person, and now he's lost their support. Now again,
Yeah,
he doesn't have to run again, so he may not care. It is what it is. He'll get it to the finish line, and we all know what's going to happen. If it goes past, he's going to blame it on the next regime because he blamed everything else on the past regime.
sure. Right.
So at some point he is the scorpion on the frog's back. He's
Yeah,
going to do what
that's right.
he does.
Yeah.
That is what it is. But so Jerry,
Well, let me.
finish up the
Hang on.
planning piece.
The thought I had about that is Trump knows, he's term limited. He believes in his heart, and I think I tend to agree with him if I'm correct, that by doing this, as painful as it is, that he will make the Middle East situation better. If not in maybe his own term, and maybe not even in his lifetime, since he's 79, I believe, that he feels that this will improve, make it safer in the Middle East for the long term. And so it's like, I don't care. I don't have to get elected. So I can do the difficult thing that no president in 47 years has ever had the gumption to do. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to take care of this. And, maybe he gets credit for it sometime in the future. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe it pans out. Maybe it doesn't. But I'm just trying to look into his mind to see what kind of motivation he might have.
No, but I
And
think that's
that's
an
one
excellent
that
point,
sticks
Jerry.
out to me.
What I heard you say was he's almost flipping the script from a time is against me because my time is going to run out to, hey,
Right.
I can't do it anymore. So I can do anything I want to do, and I can't run again. And I know there's an argument saying he's going to stay in office. Well, he didn't do it the last time, and he's not going to win the nomination, so he won't be in office. But the point is, he can do things as a non potential future president that a regime who doesn't have elections can't do because he doesn't care.
Right.
Uh,
Possibly.
Well,
Yeah,
and
that's what I'm thinking is a strong possibility.
I think I definitely think he prides himself on doing things that other people haven't done, right? Like
Yep.
he has that dimension to him. I think ultimately, look, my perspective is that, there have been a lot of downsides for presidents not acting when it comes to this. That stated, I also believe very strongly that these other presidents understood the complexity of this problem in a way that I'm not sure Trump does. And that's not to, I'm just saying that I think, or that he doesn't care, that he's going to forge ahead anyways,
That's
right?
what I think.
But it's a bit like kicking a hornet's nest, right? So you've kicked it. And this is the problem. And this is what worries me is, okay, the hornets are out now. Now what? Right? And I have yet to see, well, that's exactly kind of what it feels like is happening right now, right? We're getting stung in lots of places. But my concern is once you've done that, then what is the end goal? Like, where are you really going? Even if you were to curtail their nuclear program and maybe get, and essentially, sort of find a way to get rid of the sanctions, which is not so easy, by the way, because the snapback sanctions were activated by Germany, the UK, and France. And if that's going to get dealt with, it has to go through the Security Council. And Russia and China are very likely to block any kind of efforts at doing away with the sanctions from a leverage point of view, right? So that's my fear is that there's a question about what do you do? What's this going to look like? Like let's imagine for a minute, okay? In the next couple weeks, Trump decides to declare victory and go home, right? Does anybody have any idea where this is going to go at that point? I mean, the Iranians are certainly going to sit there and say, we survived and that was our goal, right?
Right.
And they may be in a different
And Josh,
position.
and
Yeah,
we didn't commit to not having future nuclear weapons.
right. And they actually just put on the table this morning a proposal to open the strait, end the war, and postpone the nuclear negotiations. So if that's the case, you're really right back to the beginning of the JCPOA, right? Like that's where you are now. Except there's been a lot more damage, and you could argue a hardening on both sides.
So, so there was a couple of outcomes that I saw. Number one, regime change. Trump could declare victory legitimately. Number two, if he got the Iranians to write out, we won't have a nuclear program. Which whether they follow through on it or not, that's a different topic. Um, and associated with that, he could say, our intelligence says we wiped off their program. It's off the planet. We were successful, job accomplished. And you can't verify that because the Iranians have never
Well,
let anybody in to do the verification process.
right,
Or
but in June when the US and Israel bombed and Trump said that they had obliterated the nuclear program,
Mhm.
right? And now they're saying, well, depends on what you mean by obliterated.
Right.
Right. I mean, it hasn't been obliterated. Okay. Like that's the message is that there are at least remnants. The Iranians are very good at
You say
moving
that with
things around.
confidence. Are
What's that?
are you sure? Because
No, I'm
what
only
I see
sure
in the
because
media, I
I'm
you
only
don't know.
sure. I would say this in this way, Mike. The only reason I'm quote unquote sure is because this is continuing. If you were so certain that you had obliterated it, you've achieved your objective. There isn't
Oh,
necessarily anything to negotiate. If you've destroyed the 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 uranium and other tools, right? If it's gone, then there's nothing to negotiate about it. It's gone. Like other than the capability that the scientists that they have that who know how to continue to do this kind of thing, right?
yeah.
If I mean, it was a question that Caitlin Collins asked Trump. It's like, if you obliterated this, then why are you
Right.
continuing,
Well,
right?
unless it's a false flag. And it's not the end goal. The end goal is regime change, or the end goal is control of resources. Then you are going to say, no matter what, we haven't obliterated it yet, or we haven't obliterated it to the level it needs to
Mhm.
be yet. So we must continue until what? until the
Yeah.
U.S. say it's obliterated completely,
Well,
which
yeah.
again, we don't know.
And right. And I think, but the other part of this is given everything that's transpired, like with the JCPOA and the inspections, that was hard enough, right? I think verification and I was listening to somebody yesterday who's a verification works for the IAEA was like, you know, verification is going to be that much more difficult now, um, for a number of reasons. Like, you know, the Iranians very likely are going to be sort of leading people in different directions, not where they need to be going and things along those lines. So I think the war, and to your point, Mike, like, you know, with the destruction that's happened and the death and things like that, I mean, all that does is harden people's positions and perspectives on things. And so I think from, you know, from a negotiation point of view, I mean, the very fact that the Iranians would put a proposal on the table this morning saying open the strait, end the war, and then we'll talk about the nukes, that tells you what, right? It tells you something. And it also certainly tells you that from a leveraging point of view, they're at least viewing this as they have a substantial amount of leverage still here. And I think, you know, part of that is the strait, but part of it is that they've weathered the storm, if I can put
Right.
it that way, right? And they're still there.
And that appears to be a reasonable, acceptable global position. Iran is saying we'll open the straits. Iran is saying we'll talk about nukes once everything is settled down, which every other country on the planet would say, hey, US, you got them to the table. Hey,
Yeah.
you know,
And I was just reading Richard Haas this morning wrote on his Substack was like the US should accept that deal and take the pressure down. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question.
yeah.
I was actually surprised that he said that because the whole point of this was to force them to the table, really, right? I mean, in February, and there's a guy named Jonathan Powell who I've gotten to know a little bit. I don't know if you guys know that name, but he works with the British government. He's been involved in a lot of um, high-level negotiations, and he was privy to the negotiations in February. And he wrote an article basically talking about how the Iranians had given up or were willing to give up a lot of things. Like they were moving considerably in the direction of things that had been unprecedented to that point. And then you know, Israel and the United States launched the war. And that opportunity, you know, is now gone by the wayside.
Yeah.
And one has to ask the question, you know, it's not an uncommon tactic, right, to use pressure, the pressure of military strikes and things like that to get people to be at the table. But if you're making progress, what was it that pulled you away from that? Why didn't you stay at the table?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, but that
and
goes
I
back
think,
to the media.
yeah. Mhm.
Well, so let's wrap it back to Gerry because you started off there. There is a thread, there is a plan. So let's get back on that track. What could this plan be, or what else? What other threads are out there that we need to look at?
I'm not sure what you mean by other threads,
Well,
Mike,
we
but
talked about Syria. We
um,
talked about all the different pieces, and
yeah,
now we're in the Iranian situation, war.
yeah.
So there was a master plan, and anytime I've done planning, there's always, and here's what we're trying to accomplish by doing this. Efficiencies
Well,
and operations and making money and the things on the commercial side. But this is where politically, I'm just out of my sorts. I'm out of my league on this because I don't understand what really, if there's more ulterior motives, I don't understand them always.
well, one big win for Trump right now, or for the U.S., or probably for the world, I think, is I don't know if it's the total destruction, but near total destruction of Iran's ballistic missiles. That's one thing the JCPOA did not include. And that's what the Iranians have been raining down on Israel and all their neighbors. And that's the perfect delivery vehicle for a nuclear weapon. So Trump has seriously damaged their ability to launch or even to build any further ballistic
You'd
missiles.
think those would
That's
be
not to
easy to
say somebody,
target. And with
yeah,
satellites, you'd think we
I
could
would,
track those and we just, laser guided bombs and boom, 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 boom. They'd all be gone by now.
I would think so too. And then plus, I think that somehow Trump has to get Iran to also stop funding proxies in that region. And I don't know how you do that, destroying the IRGC potentially, cutting off, making Iran poor. But I think that's going to be a real problem. Is I still think the regime is still probably trying to funnel money to all of their regional proxies like Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and whoever else is out there. So,
Hey, can I
and I
throw
don't know how you cut that off.
an
Yeah.
empathy based scenario here? I read this article 2 or 3 years ago. It was about um, Russia had to have nuclear weapons to feel safe because once the U.S. had them, it was a constant state of fear until they got them, and then it was like a de-escalation. Now globally, we saw the proliferation and the escalation, but if they didn't have them, they were in such fear that we would use them on them that there was all of these other ways that they were conspiring to hurt the United States. So I said in chat, and again, you're online, you don't know who you're dealing with. So what you're saying is Iran should have nukes because Israel has them, and Iran feels threatened because Israel has them. And they said, you're out of your mind. No, Iran can't have weapons. And I went, well, why is that different? Is it because they have said they are a mortal enemy, and when we get them, we will wipe them out? And is that rhetoric? Or would they really do a first strike if they got one bomb and they had one ballistic missile? Would they actually use it so that they could follow through to their constituents? I don't know the answer to that. I don't want to be wrong, that's for certain. But if you are living in a state of fear that your mortal enemy has something that can wipe you off the face of the earth,
Yeah, sure.
Don't you want to have one too?
Well, and this is the challenge with nuclear proliferation, right? Is that certain countries were able to get the technology and they have it, and others have pursued it, right? But it's interesting too. Like if you look at North Korea, right? North Korea, many would argue that the reason that Kim Jong-un is still in power, et cetera, is because he has nuclear capability. And like in Libya, right, Gaddafi ended up after, working out a deal, ended up dying because he didn't have that capability.
Yeah.
And so I do think that there's, many players in the world look at this and say, well, these countries have it. Like, why are they so special? Why do they get to decide who gets it and who doesn't? Right. So I think, yes, there's an element of that. And I agree with you that, the Iranians view the United States and Israel as their mortal enemy, and they both have nuclear capability. And so, from a very logical point of view, you would say this, at least if we have it, is going to create the deterrence to,
Pakistan, India,
yeah, right.
Yeah.
right?
But the other thing, by the way, is yes, Iran is, they've absolutely taken a hit here, but we have to remember two things about all of this from my point of view. China is a key player in this. They are not at all front and center here, but they get 80% of their oil from Iran. They have all kinds of trading arrangements with the Iranians, etc. And as does Russia, and so there's again, this fault line is sort of back, right, with the United States and Europe. And it's a little hard to tell exactly where Trump is on all of these things because he ebbs and flows in the Russia-Ukraine scenario kind of with the wind or with the tide, right? Where one minute like we're helping Ukraine, the next minute we're not going to do that, etc. But I think the point is that if we imagine that Iran is really economically compromised, I think they are to a large degree. But as long as China continues to support Iran, um, they're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the drivers here, as part of all of this, is that alliance has not been hampered by what's gone on. Um, and I do think that they're a critical player in the background that doesn't get talked about enough here.
Yeah.
You're probably right. One of the about China, and they could play a major role behind the scenes and probably do more so than any of us know. But one interesting point, I was just reading something, I think it was about Indonesia,
Hmm.
thinking about charging a toll through one of its narrow straits that a lot of trade and oil flow through.
Hmm.
And so, kind of an outgrowth of this whole Iranian thing is the Indonesians like, oh wow, we should be charging a toll for commerce through,
Hmm.
our.
Yeah. Uh-oh. Did I freeze up?
No,
Okay, I'm
I
back.
think Jerry might have actually. Jerry, are you still there?
Okay.
I think Jerry might have froze.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and that's uncommon, by the way, because international waterways were designated for a long time. I mean, the law of the sea treaty, created the norm that countries wouldn't be charging in that
Right.
way.
Well, and
You
so
know,
Iran said, "Hey, we're gonna. It's not international waters, as our territorial waters go 12 miles off, but it's
right,
only 21 miles wide. So
right.
Oman, they have a 12-mile offset. That's their territorial waters. And as I understand it, there's paths that go both ways. Is it in through Oman and out through Iran? But that doesn't say you couldn't bring them both in and out through Oman.
Hmm.
So if Iran
Right.
says we're going to charge a toll on every ship, Oman can say, well, we're not going to charge if you're on our side, but 21 miles and 12 plus 12, there's a very, very narrow band in there.
Yeah.
Is Oman capable of defending their territory being open from their cross-border regional partner, Iran? I
Yeah. I mean,
never hear. Yeah,
my guess is not, and especially because you can have rogue actors and people, sitting on the edge of the Strait of Hormuz with a, rocket propelled grenade or whatever, right? The threat
yeah,
is there. It doesn't take a full-on military kind of escalation to disrupt that kind of issue, right?
yeah,
And I think that's the problem is that you have a lot of possibility for that kind of thing to be happening here. If you gradually open things or if it's closed in different ways or whatever, I think there has to be some deal that creates clarity around this. Otherwise, if you're trying to fudge it and trying to have, Oman do one thing or whatever, I think there's too many ways to disrupt it and too many reasons that people might want to disrupt it.
right. Hey, Jerry, are you back with us? No video. You got your audio there? Not yet. All right, so just let me ask this then. So,
Yeah.
um, we talk about the multi-parties and who's at the table and who's not, and anybody who's not at the table can still be a disruptor.
Yeah.
How do the how do the big people in the air, the real seats at the table, how do they control their crazies, or the I shouldn't that's disrespectful. How do they control the splinter groups that feel like they're not being respected enough, um, and or just like causing problems for people?
Well, I mean, I think in most scenarios, I mean, you have spoilers in any peace process. People on, I mean, the kind of rule that I've always had in the back of my head when I've been part of some of these things is there's going to be 10% on either side of a conflict that are simply not going to go along with it, that they believe that there's a military solution and that's what ought to be pursued. There shouldn't be a negotiated agreement. So and those people will continue to try to disrupt. I think if you can have 75 to 80% of the people on board with what's going on, and that comes back to the kind of deal that you create in the end, right? And we all know, even though we don't always act this way, we all know that um, within Iran, within the United States, within Israel, within all of these countries, there are major gradations of views. They're not monoliths. And I think that's part of the challenge. And I think in some ways, yes, there are people that are still um, you know, making decisions in Iran, but like the very notion of who are you negotiating with? Is it, Khamenei? Is it Aragachi? Is it Ghalibaf? Is it who knows? And do they speak for everybody? I think that's another element to this. I mean, in those strikes, the United States killed off a lot of the leadership in Iran. And so, there's a real question about if you even come up with a deal, is it the kind of thing that can be implemented, can be followed through, et cetera? And
What
is
I heard
it
you say is
balanced?
it's going to be, no matter how clean the paper is, different languages and political, it's going to be messy.
Yeah,
There is
it
no
is, and
declared,
that
there's no
really,
World War II. Like, yay, we're all done. There's no Treaty of Versailles. We all sign off and go back
I
to our
don't think
things.
so.
Yeah.
I don't think so. And I think, like I said, I think that you could come up with some arrangement here. But I think the question is, again, is it going to address what this was all about in the first place? Right. And I think that is the problem, and that is the biggest challenge that's in front of us. And that's why, from my point of view, I keep coming back to what does it look like when we're all said and done here? What does this look like? And I think it's very, very uncertain as to what that could be. Because if you leave, if the regime stays in place, um, then I just don't know what you've fully accomplished. Um,
Well, look, you know, Trump is a word mix master
mhm,
who can already claim regime change simply because it's not the same person that started, and he killed somebody. Now, one thing in yesterday's events at the correspondence dinner, we
mhm,
don't want to get into talk of that kind of
yeah.
thing, but there was talk while Trump was running that there was a Iranian backed or planned attempt when he was a
Mhm.
candidate.
Yeah.
Now, if you take the psychology of somebody like Trump and you hear that somebody's trying to kill you, you're going to be kind of vengeful. You know,
Hmm.
he
Yeah,
doesn't play nicely with people who don't play nicely with him. So
for
could this
sure.
be a
For sure.
personal vendetta? Once he got into office, he read the reports. He verified that they did try to kill him. And
Hmm.
oh yeah, well I'm going to hurt you back. Could it be personal?
I don't doubt that there's that possibility. I haven't really heard that narrative too much. The narrative that I've heard much more so is that that Netanyahu, this has been Netanyahu's stated objective is regime change in Iran since
Yeah.
he's been in political office. And some of the folks that I know have said to me that Netanyahu's come and he's talked to Biden and he's talked to Obama and he's talked to Bush, etc., about doing this, and they all said no.
And Trump's
And
the only one who actually moved the embassy, right?
mhm.
They all said they were going to move the embassy, but Trump actually followed through. He's been the biggest supporter of Israel of any president.
Well, I don't, none of the other, well, Obama for sure did not say that he would move the embassy. And it was a controversial thing. I mean, again, moving it from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem is a controversial thing because, to the Palestinians and to the Israelis and to others, Jerusalem is a holy city. And so yes, he did that. And again, for some people, like to great acclaim and to others, right? But I think the bigger question is, was he sold by Netanyahu on the fact that this was something that they could do, that it would be, that it wouldn't be a long drawn out kind of thing. It would be a relatively quick kind of endeavor.
Well, and it's
And
on the heels of Venezuela. And I
right,
haven't
where
read all the
he,
details.
yeah.
I mean, ghosts came in, and to hear their security guards tell it. Now, again, this is in the media, so is it true or is it for public consumption that
Yeah.
the U.S. has weapons that can just make soldiers crumble and not fire their weapons and I know, like, I've seen this where we can look around corners and we can have
Yeah.
all the guys in the battlefield connected in a AI, and I
Right.
can see what you're seeing in real time. And I mean,
Yeah.
the capability of the US is amazing, and we did it. It's one thing to have the theoretical capability. It's another thing to take out the president of a nation in and out in an hour, zero loss of life.
Yeah.
That's
But it's
impressive.
also it is, and yet I would actually make the case that that was a false sort of comfort that came of that. If in
Yeah.
fact you were trying to draw the lesson that, hey, we did it in Venezuela, and so we can do it in Iran, and it will be an easy, it will be easier than people think, et cetera, right? I think, those lessons often take us down the wrong road. That we think that, and it's a completely different scenario, and nothing. I mean, things have changed in Venezuela in terms of oil and allocations and things like that. I mean, the U.S. has actually been, taking some of the oil from there, et cetera. But it's a completely different scenario. But I think you're right that they potentially could have convinced themselves, hey, we did it here, we can do it there.
And
Right. I think, which
outside
is
of Trump, Hegseth he's no short of confidence either.
right.
He's
Right.
big and bold and wants to be known as the person who
Yeah.
led the initiatives that no one has ever done before.
Right. But again, the interesting piece to this, and I do think that the negotiation itself has been a bit of talking past each other. That I think that the U.S. delegation is rooted in the Trump short-term transactional way of doing things,
Yeah,
and the Iranians, that's not their approach. Their style and their approach is a long, slow, get an initial yes, and then start negotiating the real
right,
stuff, right?
right.
And so I think that there's, look, I don't know too many people that would consider Trump patient. I think that's one of his downsides.
Yeah,
Um, and and because he's not patient, I think what's gone on at the negotiating table is frustrating. The fact that they went to Islamabad, they spent 20 hours, and they declared the negotiations over. It's like, it took almost 2 years to negotiate the JCPOA. And I just don't know whether, some of my understanding is that, like with Witkoff and Kushner, they weren't grasping the technical details that people were laying out in front of them. And they're not
yeah,
nuclear scientists, so why would they?
right.
Right. But you've got to put together a team that's going to understand how complicated this problem is and what it's really going to take to change things. I mean, and to Jerry's point about the proxies, the Hamas is crippled, Hezbollah is struggling mightily. The Houthis are somewhat intact, but so the proxies on some level um, have been, crippled in different ways and are probably not nearly as effective as
But
they had
but
been.
now they've got a recruiting tool.
Yeah,
The
right.
great Satan has struck again, and
Yeah,
we need your sons.
yeah, you got it. I mean, and what happened between Israel and Gaza, it certainly, unless there is some form of agreement, to your point, it's setting up the next round of conflict because the devastation and destruction on both sides was so horrendous that these societies are now traumatized and people have lost brothers, sisters, mothers, cousins, uncles,
Yeah,
fathers, right? And when that happens, it's those people aren't necessarily enemies for life, but it's going to take a lot to make it different,
yeah.
right? I think that's the
So
problem we're up against.
let me ask this, because LinkedIn is our
Yeah,
primary mode there, and we got a lot of business people there, and that's my background. So
yeah.
my cognitive bias always goes to that. Going back to the original agreement back was in 1920 something when
You talk about the
British
JCPOA?
no, when British Petroleum came into Iran and said, and I'm going to get the number wrong, we're going to give you 10 cents on every dollar
Huh?
of oil, and the Iranians said, oh, you're going to give us all the infrastructure and we just have to sit here and do nothing, and you give us 10 cents for every dollar. That's a good deal. We don't have anybody else. There is no BATNA. Our BATNA
Hmm.
is we just sit here in the desert,
Hmm.
or we could be really wealthy by doing nothing but letting you come. So
Hmm.
so they let them come in. And then the Saudis negotiated a better deal, and they got
Hmm.
50-50. And the Iranians said, "Hey, we want the 50-50 deal."
Hmm.
And British Petroleum said, "Yeah, no, we negotiated. You got your 10. That was way better than any other offer you had.
Yeah,
So no."
yeah.
And hold their ground. And then the Iranians took control of all the assets and said, "Okay, well, we're going to throw you out." And now people who put in billions of dollars of assets of capital infrastructure got thrown
Mhm.
out. Well, we know they have wealthy friends, and they went to the heads of the government, the U.S. and in the UK, and they said, "Hey, we got to get these guys out." So then they put the Shah in. And then the Shah
Mhm.
was brutal for years and years and years and years. And then the Iranians said, "Hey, listen, we got to get the Shah out." So the pendulum was swinging back and forth, but it was all based on, shouldn't say all based, but a lot of it was based on the initial deal, the commercial deal, that the Iranians didn't have a better offer. They took it, they liked it until
Yeah,
they found out someone else got a better deal than them,
yeah.
and they were mad.
And I think that, and as you know, Mike, I mean, there are a lot of places in the world where negotiated agreements are viewed as complete and final, and then others where they are viewed as a starting point, or relationships change. Like the Chinese are kind of famous for that, right? Where
Yeah.
we have a contract, but we don't, things have changed, so we need to renew the contract, or we need to sit down and negotiate again. I think that's part of the orientation. It's another dimension to the cultural part of this. One isn't right or wrong, right? It's just that that's how you view a negotiated agreement,
Yeah.
through that lens. And so you don't think twice about saying, hey, now that we have some comparative thing, we realize, we got taken advantage of, or we shouldn't have agreed, or whatever, right? And
Yeah.
so, like, we want to come back to the table.
Yeah.
And that creates lots of problems for people, from the West, who are very used to that not being the scenario. It's like, no, you agreed to a deal, and so stick to it.
Yeah. Well, and it's not even necessarily, regional in that regard. Although, so I'll tell you a quick story. I was in a
Mm,
negotiation competition, and in it, the deal that was constructed, it our partners from Switzerland, and we negotiated up front. We said, are we going to negotiate Swiss style or US style? Just kind of joking,
mhm.
just to make
Yeah,
sure we kind of understand. And I said, you have full permission to be very direct. People in that region are very,
sure.
very
Yeah, yeah.
direct people. So I said, let's not dance around. My partner's from the UK. I said, no disrespect, but not let's not be like pleasant and posh and polite. If you need something, you say it.
Mm,
So we get the deal in place, and they told us a long-term deal hurts us, and
mm,
I didn't have a reason to not trust them. So I said, okay,
mhm,
well, let's make it a shorter term deal. When the deal summary came to put into the system, their email said, we do this in the spirit of hopefully there will be a long-term agreement.
mm,
Now, I went, wait a minute, you said short term hurt you. We wanted long term. That helped us. When they wrote, hopefully there will be a long term agreement, I wrote
mm.
back and I said, oh, do we need to reopen the negotiation because we're very
Yeah,
interested in the long term deal.
yeah.
And there was a couple of back and forths, and they got kind of defensive, argumentative over it. And
Mm,
I said, guys, you said these words, and
mm,
I quoted it and I highlighted it. So my interpretation was you were maybe I misinterpreted the first time, but you want a long-term deal. They came back and they said, you know what, Mike? No deal. I had angered them so much. So in
mm.
my brain, I went, okay, how did it go from I took them at their word, then I saw an opening. I tried to explore it politely, and they were so offended that I would, because they said, but we told you in the meeting that long term hurt us. And I'm like, yeah, but the words say you wanted long term. So
Mm,
there was a
mm.
confusion there, even though they were Swiss and they spoke excellent English. And I keep going back to how did I screw it up? I was just following the information that was put in front
Yeah,
of me,
yep,
and it sucks. But if you can screw up a competition with professional negotiators, you can
right.
absolutely screw it up if both sides have nukes or the threat of nukes or
Sure. Yeah. And it's interesting because people often talk about the fog of war, but I think there's the fog of negotiation, as well.
yeah,
When people are coming at processes very, very differently. I think one of the criticisms of the JCPOA was it was sort of very straightforward and it had a little bit of a finite nature to it. And I think the US was thinking that it could be a strategic tool for getting Iran to change. And I don't know whether that was ever the case or not. Um, but again, I think that it's very common, and I'm sure you know this too, and I think people listening, it's very common for people to go away from the negotiating table with very different understandings of what transpired. And so, like I said, in as much as there's a fog of war where misinformation happens and the truth gets lost and things like that, I think that happens a lot in negotiation as well.
yeah,
When you've got people who come to the table with really, really different ways of doing things,
yeah,
and a lot of unstated dimensions to the process.
yeah. Well, I will just say this: I coach a lot of salespeople, and I've spent a lot of time in the buying seat. And what I've found is salespeople like to think that they have a good relationship. They like me. I can't believe I lost the deal. And what salespeople don't understand is buyers can have multiple good relationships with multiple suppliers.
Right.
And hey, you were 1A, but
Yeah.
we had to go with one. We had to make one decision, and you lost out. but
Yeah.
but we like each other. Yeah, but I like them too. So there's that angle. Also, what I think a lot of people don't understand is, as a buyer, some of the best relationships I've had is not with the people who I was the friendliest with. Some of the
Hmm.
best supplier buyer relationships I've had is with the suppliers who are just frustrating.
Hmm.
But in my brain, I'm going, God, they're so smart. They've got such good value. Even though I don't like them,
Hmm.
friendly with them, I will tolerate some conflict because of the value they produce. And I think
Yeah.
that's, in politics is the same way, right? You're not always going to get along with your trade partners, and
Yeah.
you both have each side that you have to play to. I heard
Yeah.
that Clinton and Gingrich, when they
Yeah.
were, having their conflicts, um,
Yeah.
uh, Gingrich and Clinton both separately said they talked to each other every day. They
Yeah.
were on CNN and Fox yelling at each other or about each
Yeah.
other. And behind the scenes, there was a daily phone call. How do we get this done?
Well, and I think that is the thing that sort of, again, because of what's transpired, like I think some of that was happening up until February, right?
Yeah.
But then when the war launched, I think that's the kind of piece that fell apart. And that there isn't that dimension. I mean, obviously they're continuing to talk through intermediaries and other kinds of things, but there's still even a question of, are they going to, even if we agree to something, are they going to live up to it on both sides? Like I
Yeah.
think both are really questioning that, and I think rightly so.
Well, and
Um,
I don't think no matter what's agreed to, I honestly believe that the chance they'll follow through over more than 4 years of a regime is it's not realistic. This historically, if you had to
yeah.
bet,
Well, yeah, I agree, and that's why, there has to be all these verification measures, and this is where I think, for example, if you did have a deal that was regional in scope, you could have some of these players, taking some of these
yeah,
things on, like a
you almost have
Saudi
to have the
Arabia.
Saudis.
Yeah.
Yes, the Saudis may have to be the adults in the room in the region, and take charge of the responsibility for everyone doing what they said they're going to do.
Yeah, and at some point last year, I mean, the Saudis were actually talking to the Iranians about different arrangements between them. And so there was an element of that. And again, maybe that's something that comes out of this. But, like I said, and we don't have to, keep going down that road. I think the question is, if you declare victory too soon, and things are sort of left in the way they are, I'm just not sure what's been accomplished from all of this. And where all this goes. And I genuinely don't think anybody could tell you the answer to that question.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree.
so
All right, listen, let's wrap it up. Let's thank our viewers that are out there. Josh, it's always been a pleasure. I'll let Gerry know, that the technical
yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
We apologize for him not being on the whole show. Gerry's got tremendous value add with negotiating with tyrants. If anybody wants to follow that series as well, and we'll see you in the next couple of weeks.
sounds good. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks. All right, hey everybody, welcome back to Only Negotiations in the News. And we've got a supplemental edition here. Gerry lost his internet connection, so want to make sure he gets his airtime. And here we go. Gerry, so you'd started us off with a structured approach to Trump's methods as it relates to where we are now, which go all the way back to Syria. And later in the episode, we talked about maybe even before that, it might have been, the Iranians, there was word that they tried to assassinate Trump while he was running. So he might have had some preconceived emotional baggage coming into this. But regardless, pick up where you left off. Tell us about the approach you think is going on that we can kind of take a look at from a negotiation perspective.
Well, I think Trump, I think he's wanted to do this for years. And I'm not sure why he didn't do it in his first term, but he chose to do it now. And he set it up, as I said before, by removing Syria as an ally of Iran. He took Venezuela off the table, who was another ally of Iran. Same with Cuba, took them off the table as an ally of Iran. So he set this up, I think, pretty smartly. And then he made his move, which was great. He went in
Well,
with
and
the
he's
bombing,
got
but then,
Russia bogged down in Ukraine, right?
yes,
So
yep,
there's a here's what I heard from a friend of the military. The Russian military force was to be reckoned with. And then when the fall happened, they stopped doing things like maintaining their ships. One of my friends was alongside a Russian naval, and he said, "Yeah, it floats, but it has not been in good repair for a long period of time." So I think they have limited resources in Russia, not raw materials, but from a political perspective to go to war. And it feels like they're bogged down and they can't go do things like defend Cuba or Venezuela or basically anyone else on the planet. It is that part of it too.
Well, I agree. Russia got their hands full with Ukraine, and I've heard the same thing about the ships, and even a lot of their military equipment is not very well maintained, and it's not performing well. So probably the only thing the Russians can do to support Iran is, maybe give them some energy, give them some money, give them, I don't know, small arms or something. But I believe Iran had either Russian or Chinese air defense systems, which we took off the table, day one or day two. So that's not going to help the Russians sell their S-400s or S-300s to the world. It's not going to make China look very good with whatever equipment they were selling to Iran. But Iran and China, or China and Russia are still supporting Iran, and it's probably and
Well,
North Korea.
you can say, "Yay, we support you," but if you can't put, boots on the ground, if you can't, and Iran doesn't need necessarily the Russian energy. If anything, I think Russia needs some Iranian, oil, as I understand it, they're a supplier. But when Trump was running, he said, "I can solve Ukraine in a day," and everybody said, "You're out of your mind," right? But look, it doesn't stop him from being bold. And
Yeah.
then when he couldn't stop it, and when Putin wouldn't do what he said, and Zelensky wouldn't do what he said, Trump might have got frustrated and said, "You know what? I'm going to end this war a different way. I'm going to drag Russia down by all these other conflicts that have nothing to do with Ukraine. But now when Russia is diluted in anything that they do you think the Iran conflict or war could be part of the plan to hurt Putin for not ending the Ukraine war?"
Mike, that's crossed my mind, and I think it's very possible. I don't know if for sure if it is, but I think Trump probably put that into the equation when he was figuring out when's a good time to do this, and probably saw Russia being bogged down, and so sort of taking them off the table,
Okay.
and so I think that's very possible. And China, I think the last thing they want to do is put boots on the ground, or North Korea, into Iran. So he probably thought this was an opportunity. It's not going to get any easier or any better than it currently is. So this
Yeah.
is the time to strike.
Okay.
So
Okay. So
yeah.
now I've sidetracked us again. So now we're
No.
focused on your plan, the plan you think that happened.
So, and then I think where Trump, he had he set up the deal really well, but then he made, I think I mentioned yesterday, made a blunder by destroying probably a good part of the enriched uranium that the Iranians could use to trade for peace. And then he came out with this silly social media post about the Iranians have agreed to everything we've proposed. And I don't think they did. And it made the Iranian regime lose face with their people. And I think that made the Iranians even more entrenched against wanting to do a deal with Trump. So I think his bluster probably hurt him, when if he would have just not said anything and let the deal materialize, if there was a deal, would have been much smarter and could have led to a peaceful settlement, or a conclusion of the war much sooner than by saying, "Oh, the Iranians have agreed to everything," when they probably didn't or may not have wanted to agree to everything.
Well,
And
that brings
so
into the impact of there's a negotiating. And if you and I are negotiating,
Yeah.
one-on-one in a closed room, no one else can see us. There's a certain dynamic, an emotional dynamic. We have to trust each other. I have to like what you're offering. You have to like what I'm offering, and we're the only ones we really have to sell it to. We just have to sleep all night. And then in business, one person in sales, one person in purchasing. Well, they have a team of people they have to kind of sell it to. They have to internally negotiate, internally socialize deals.
Yep.
And then when you get into the public context, politicians, they have to sell it to their constituents. So they've got a whole mass people. And I don't know if you were on when we talked about it, but apparently the ceasefire was in 4 languages so that each country could claim some value to show their side that we're strong and they conceded. And I always ask myself when I see something in the media, why was this chosen to be released? Who chose it? Who wrote the words? What's the medium? Whether it's online or in print. Is it a right-wing thing and they're going to say right-wing things, or is it a left-wing thing? They're going to say left-wing things, or does the left wing, when I see CNN say something that I would normally see on Fox, I go, wait a minute. Why is CNN saying this? I almost give it more validity when I see something like that. So to your point on Trump, he's a master media manipulator. I've had people say that if he would have just not tweeted in his first term, he would have won a second term. And I believe that Twitter banning him was the best thing that ever happened to Trump, because he was forced to zip it to a large percent of the population. And he got Truth Social, and I don't have it, so I'm not familiar with all the details. But certainly he has to be in control of the messaging. Whether it's correct or not is a different story. So
Yep.
so the Iranians, are they just playing his game?
Well, just back to your comment about Trump, I don't think he can contain himself, Mike. I just think that's just him. He's got to always be out there, and it just, he may be a great negotiator in a lot of aspects, but I think that works against him. As you and I would both know from, there's times to talk and there's times not to talk, but I think he chooses to talk more than he should, and it's counterproductive.
So, Jerry, you've studied a lot of negotiators, and I just re-listened to your episode with Tony Anagar, and thank you for the shout out there, by the way. And in studying them, Trump wrote the book, Art of the Deal.
Yep.
Actually, let's be honest, Ghost wrote the book, which means he paid somebody to write a bunch of words.
Yep.
Now, Trump drove 3 casinos into bankruptcy. I believe 3 is the number. I worked in the casino industry. I worked with some people who did not make smart decisions, and they were able to avoid bankruptcy.
Okay.
Now you could make the argument that the bankruptcy law is like that famous thing when Clinton said, "You don't pay your taxes," and Trump said, "That makes me smart because I'm manipulating the tax code." You could absolutely make the argument that he negotiated in such a way in his own personal self-interest. I don't have a jet. I mean, I like to think I'm a pretty good negotiator. I had a good career, but I never got a jet. He's got a jet with his name on it. So in the bankruptcy laws, he shells these companies, right? Private equity. You take all the assets out, you sell them off to yourself or to somebody else. You get consulting fees, and then you say, "Oh, sorry, everybody, we're bankrupt," and leave everyone else holding the bag, like he's been known to do with suppliers. So being a good negotiator, if you say it in terms of your own self-interest, perhaps he is quite the excellent negotiator. But if you look at negotiating on behalf of a collection of people, be it shareholders, be it teammates at the company, be it constituents, I'm not so sure. So you study negotiators. What do you think about that?
Well, like I said, I think it depends on the perspective. If you're, Trump himself, he used all the legal tools available to him to achieve what he wanted to achieve. And there's a lot of, wounded and dead, in his wake. Is that a good thing? No, but if you're just looking at it, I'm Trump. That worked. I used all the tools, legal tools available to me. So, then we're coming down to ethical questions. And as far as a negotiator, maybe that was, the right thing to do. Not just here to judge morality, but just negotiating methodologies.
I think he is excellent at identifying the BATNA for the other side. And realizing when someone doesn't have a better alternative. There's famous stories about how he, hired contractors who come in and did electrical work, and then they got the invoice, and he said, "I'm not going to pay. I'll pay you 10 cents on the dollar." And they said, "You're out of your mind." And he said, "Sue me. It's going to cost you more to go to court. You better take the 10 cents." Then it's because he understands when he has leverage, and then he exploits it, to use that word. So there's a lot of I'll say techniques that he uses. I do think, when you have a hammer and you're good at hammering, everything looks like a
Yep.
nail. I think he
Yep.
uses those. Um,
Yep.
but he is. There's a Bruce Lee quote that was on your podcast with Tony. I don't fear a person who knows 1,000 techniques. I fear the person who knows one technique and
Yep.
has practiced it 1,000 times.
Yep.
So then in that context, and I love Bruce Lee quotes, Trump becomes the person that Bruce Lee would fear because he is so good at exploiting leverage
Yep.
against the other side. What do you think is going on with Iran in this situation? Are they really that weak and he thought he could push it over the edge and he misread? The Iranians didn't revolt?
I believe so, Mike. And I'm disappointed the Iranians didn't revolt either. I thought they would have, but I'm sure that's a complex situation, being on the ground and revolting. But I thought that was a real possibility, and it doesn't look like that happened. And I think Trump calculated that they would revolt, and now it turned out they did.
He's the liberator, and they would wave
Yeah.
flags and.
Yep. And that's who he is. A lot of bravado and look what I've done for you. And, go ahead. There you go. Take the hill.
Yeah.
Charge the castle.
In the string, in the thread that you were putting together for us, what's the next piece that you see that could be a fall or a domino or a straw on the camel's back, however you want to frame it up, toward some ultimate end game?
Well, I thought Trump had a good idea that the Iranians didn't think was a good idea, but I think I don't know, it might come back into play now. He had proposed that they give we the United States whatever enriched uranium that they still had in return, and we would control it. We'd take it to the U.S. and we would even help them build nuclear power plants, but it would sort of be under our control. And we would, in return, unfreeze $20 billion worth of frozen assets that we have here, of theirs, that we have here in the United States. And I think today there was something, there's the talk is that they will allow the Strait of Hormuz to open, but they don't want to talk about the nuclear situation until another time in the future, which,
right.
And I wouldn't buy that. So I think Trump ought to bring that out again. You give us the uranium you have, we'll unfreeze the 20 billion of your assets that we have. You guys unfreeze the Strait of Hormuz, and maybe we can call it a day.
But then isn't Trump putting himself, by accepting that deal, wouldn't he be putting himself in the same deal that he blames Obama and Biden for, giving the Iranians all these billions of dollars?
Well, but we get the uranium.
Are we sure? Yeah. How are you ever 100% sure? Oh, we have inspections. Well, how do the inspectors know to look in this building and not that building, or in this mountain and not that mountain? And I know we've got satellites and we're, the weapons of mass destruction, and we think we track stuff and then we don't track stuff, or dare I say, we lie about what we find. And now with AI, I mean, I still think I can detect when it's fake, and when I see it's fake, I kind of tune out. But we're just seeing the commercial grade stuff. There's got to be some military grade AI that you won't be able to detect what the truth is. When some future president wants to trot out, they broke the policy, I want to, put boots on the ground, regime change. Oh, have you frozen up again, Gerry?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Okay, now you're back.
No, no, you make a good point, Mike. Can we ever be 100% sure they're telling the truth? No. And probably there's no chance, 100% chance that we're telling the complete truth either. But
sure. Yeah.
Short of just continuing, to destroy their country, which is an option that Trump could do. I think that's very possible. But, I think that JCPOA, we did give them money, and we got nothing for it. There were still sites that were not monitored, and we did not
we got promises.
Require them to get rid of their ballistic missiles. Yeah, and we got nothing. And that.
But Gerry, can we ever trust each other with this? the history dating back to, as Josh and I were talking about. So, and I'm going to get the dates wrong. Um, British Petroleum came into Iran, said, "Hey, we'll put all the investment in. We'll build all these factories. We're going to drill for oil, and we're going to give you 10 cents on every dollar." And the Iranians said, "What do we have to do?" And they said, "Just give us the land. We'll take care of everything." 10 cents. And they said, "Nothing?" And British Petroleum said, "We got this. We know what we're doing." And then after years went by, the Saudis got a deal that was 50-50. And the Iranians said, hey, we want 50-50. And British Petroleum said, no, you got 10%. That's what you negotiated for. And the Saudis got more. They negotiated a different deal. And the Iranians said, yeah, well, we want that. And British Petroleum said, you're not getting that. So they said, okay, fine. We're going to take all your stuff, your billions in capital investment, and we're going to nationalize it. And then we put the Shah in, and the Shah was brutal for, what was he, 47 years, something like that. And then the Iranians said enough and threw the Shah out, who flew out with a plane load of gold, almost couldn't take off. And then, I guess what I say is I want to have empathy for the people of Iran. I understand why they fundamentally distrust outsiders, primarily the Brits and the Americans. I get it. If I were in their shoes, if I were, we're all born through this lottery, right? You're born into a country and you become a slave because you have to have a passport. So it is what it is. If I happened to be born an Iranian and knew all these facts, I'd be pretty pissed off too. I wouldn't trust the Americans and the Brits either. Would you?
Yeah, and I feel no. I agree with you, Mike. I absolutely agree with you. But we had this same situation with the Soviet Union in the Cold War and the nuclear weapons, where we didn't trust each other, but we were able to put in place mechanisms to verify each other's claims. So we did have agreements. Now with the Iranians, they're probably even less trustworthy.
But weren't those bilateral?
Yeah, they were.
Are we really going to let an Iranian inspector come into our facilities?
Well, that would all have to be worked out. But here's where I'm going to go with this: is I think the Strait of Hormuz thing, I don't understand why we can't just bomb or militarily seize and destroy whatever capabilities the Iranians have in the Strait of Hormuz to limit the safe passage of ships. Why we're even allowing them to set up toll booths, if you will, there is beyond me. I'm sure we have the capability of dropping some well-placed bombs and take care of whatever their toll booth situation is, and just say maybe we have to close it for a month or two to clear all the mines to make it safe. But I don't even know why we're talking to the Iranians about it.
Laser guided bomb. The military, what we can do, what we did in Venezuela, in and out, zero loss of life. The security forces of Venezuela talking about how they couldn't even fire. They were in such pain. We have these weapons that nobody else on the planet has. Yeah. How can we not find a big bomb underwater, big metal thing? How our satellites are all over, Elon Musk and space Starlink. Like, how are we not able to find these and just, bam, 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 take them out with a bomb versus letting a ship run into them? That doesn't make sense to me. Now, I understand the drone technology, and apparently the Iranians have amazing drones that are really hard to identify, catch, do anything about. Nope. Did I lose you again, Gerry?
Yeah, but
there you're back.
I'm with you. No, I'm here. No, I agree with you, Mike. That's why I kind of feel like we got to just, have a military campaign to clean up the Strait of Hormuz and completely take Iran out of the game.
Because if you bomb the Straits of Iran,
they have no control over it.
True, and the press doesn't have control. So when you bomb a military target, hard target, and now it's a school. 6 months ago, it was where the guard met, but they took the guard out and they put school children in, and your intelligence wasn't in real time enough to know. Then you look bad in front of the world press. But when you're just taking out mines, in the water and school children aren't being killed, there's no real political damage that can happen. I'm a little surprised that that's not an initiative.
Mike, I feel the same way too. I mean, destroying all their defenses in the Strait of Hormuz would be no additional political damage to that. You're just hitting military targets.
Yeah, unless going back to your planning thing, unless that's not part of the plan, unless we want them to have some limited capabilities, so they will strike because they're pissed, and then we can use those strikes as further reasoning for why we need to stay in the region and we need to stay strong. If we make them completely incapacitated, then we don't need to be there.
Right. Well, you're right about that. And I still think I'm going to go back to something I said yesterday, which kind of is proof is I think the way Trump is looking at this is, I wanted to do this for years. I'm in a position to do it. I don't have to be elected a second time, again. I don't, I'm a lame duck basically, and I'm going to, break things, destroy things, whatever it takes. I'm going to get my way no matter how ugly this thing is, because in my mind, at the end of the day, be at the end of my term or 10 years from now, the world will be a better place with a devastated Iran. And, and let the chips fall where they may. I'm going to my grave a happy man if I'm able to, take apart the Iranian regime. And, if it makes sense or not, I don't care. It makes sense to me. It may not be right, but I think that's what he's thinking.
Okay, one of the things I really, really like about working with you, Gerry, is you answer every question, whether you're right or wrong, or I mean, you take a shot at it and you're fully transparent about what you know and what you don't know. And I love that. I was in an online debate the other day, and I asked a question of the person who made a statement, and I think the question revealed that their argument was kind of weak, and I said, hey, you still haven't answered my question. 3 times I said, you haven't answered my question. And they came back and they said, Mike, you're like the pigeon who shows up on the chessboard and you crap all over and you throw the pieces and you say you won. And I said to him, I said, well, so you're basically saying you're the person who's not smart enough to keep the pigeon off the chessboard. But at the end of the day, what I heard you say about Trump was he has nothing to lose. Right? He can literally do whatever he wants. And therefore, he's just going to walk around like a pigeon on the chessboard and knock off pieces and do what he wants to do.
Pigeon management, fly in, shit all over everything and fly out.
It could be. I really like to think there's some the buck stops here. While I understand it fundamentally why it's important, I think is one of the most harmful mindsets on the other side of the coin that we've had, because everything that a government does, somebody picks up and says, Trump did that, Trump did that, Trump did that. Well, Trump didn't do that. Trump has a cabinet, and then the cabinet people have their subordinates, and then there's a frontline person who's just getting paid to go do a job, and they had a bad day on their way to work, and they were ticked off, and they screwed up. So it's not always the top person. Now, there is a culture that they create, absolutely. But I would hope in our situation we're talking about here, you've got lifelong military experts. And I understand, Pete Hegseth, he's Trumpian in his approach, strong, I'm going to do things that you've never seen done before kind of a thing. So you got 2 people at the top saying that. But there's also hundreds of thousands of good military people who are patriots, who will bleed on the flag to keep it red. And I would hope it's a numbers game. There's enough of them to stop the pigeons and keep the strategic chess pieces on the board. Your thoughts on that topic?
I think you're right, Mike. I mean, Trump is, he's the executive. He sets the direction and the tone, and, people have to execute beneath him. And, many of those people are smart, seasoned, strategic thinkers, and, capable of doing the right thing.
Well, let's go back to how you started off, talking about how there is a thread, there is a master plan here.
Yeah, now, I think that. Oh, go ahead.
Well, as a negotiator in business, I'm gonna pull RFPs. I'm gonna pull data out of the RFPs. I'm gonna put it into Excel spreadsheets. I'm gonna ask ChatGPT some questions. I'm always looking for data and trends. I'm gonna put together a plan, and I'm going to tell my teammates, this is the plan. Here's what I need you to do. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's what we expect the other side to do. And there's a discussion about it. Now, we don't know every detail. No one ever does. But there's a high level meeting that says, this is the strategy session. This is what we're trying to accomplish. Do you think there was ever a Trump cabinet meeting that he said, okay, here's what we're going to do. See, first thing, Syria. Second thing, Venezuela, then Cuba. Do you think he sat down and actually said those things? Or do you think he had it, but they were all up here, but he didn't dare tell anybody? Or do you think he is a circumstantial negotiator? Oh, this is out there. It works in my best interest. Let's do it. Oh, that's out there. Oh, it's in my best interest. Let's do it. And it's a coincidence that everything came together.
No, I do not think it was a coincidence. As a matter of fact, and I'll tell you why. I think there was thinking, there was collaboration and thinking on this. Now, Trump came up with it, it was his idea, and from a high level as the executive. And what I see is I see the hand of Marco Rubio on the setup of this. Marco Rubio, in my opinion, is a very strategic thinker. And I think he crafted the setup and, probably discussed it with Trump, and Trump probably, and I think Trump appreciates or values his input. And I think it was Marco Rubio, especially in the Venezuela and the Cuba portion of it. The Syria, not so sure, but Venezuela and Cuba, I think was Rubio saying, okay, you want to go after Iran? Great. But we'll do this first to set it up. And then, then go full force, go get him, Tiger. But I think it would my opinion, and I could be wrong, but I think it was Rubio who did the setup on this whole thing with Iran, with Venezuela, Syria, and Cuba, most particularly Cuba and Venezuela.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. That's an epiphany to me, and I don't disagree with it. I had thought it was a more I'll call it a more macho thing from a Hegseth perspective, that he wanted to show Daddy Trump, like, hey, let's put the full force of the U.S. military. Let's show people what the world can do. Kind of that mentality. I thought it went, but you are right. Rubio's definitely a strategic player in all of this, and he was on the Intelligence Committee. And I forget the committee before that, but as a senator, I believe he knew all about Syria and its importance and who supported who. And I mean, Tulsi's over there too, right? She got in trouble with the Democratic Party for meeting with the Syrians. They called her a Russian asset for daring to go meet, right? It's just two people talking. I talk to people all the time. I'm not anybody's asset. I don't think I am. Maybe I am.
Yeah. Right.
Fascinating. So what do you think the next move is in all this? We got a couple minutes. Let's wrap it up with next thoughts.
Yeah, two things, because I want to go back to your pigeon comment, which I really found funny. But I still think, I don't know that from a tactical standpoint, where we are a week from now, but I still think Trump is going to push ahead with his grand plan of doing whatever he can to make Iran, or to make sure Iran is no longer the problem they have been with the proxies, the ballistic missiles, the uranium. He's going to do whatever he can to take that problem off the table in the Middle East. Whether it's comes together real nice, I don't know, but I think he's going to charge ahead and do whatever he can to destroy Iran and make them not a problem anymore.
Are the Saudis our partners? Okay, go ahead. No, finish that up. Yeah.
Oh, I think I lost the audio, Mike.
I'm here. I can hear you.
Oh, here?
Yeah, the audio.
I hear you okay.
Oh, okay. For some reason, I wasn't hearing you. Under the pigeon, that guy you were debating.
It was a lady.
A lady. When they start saying that in a debate, make some derogatory comment, then it's like, I know they've lost the debate. When they're resorting to name calling, that means they have no point to make. They're intellectually bankrupt, and that's all they've got left in the tank. So.
I'd like to think that, and when I've been called bad names online, I have a standard phrase. I can almost copy and paste it. I say, thank you for revealing your character. When somebody goes low, I'm of the Michelle Obama, phrase. When
Uh-huh.
they go
Yep.
low, we go high.
Yeah.
Thank
Yep.
you for revealing your character. I'm not going to get dragged down into this. Now, do I get down and dirty? I have. I've done some things I'm
Yep.
not proud of, and I'm not perfect. I don't always stay the
Yep.
path.
Yep.
But my initial reaction is I'm not going to lose sleep at night. Not going to let some random person I don't even know online
Yeah.
take me
Yeah.
off my game. I'm
Yeah.
just going to
Yeah.
say thank you and leave that comment there for everyone to see that
Yep.
they went low. I didn't go lower, and I just. But anyway, um, this is a fascinating conversation, Gerry. I appreciate you being open to it, and with your negotiating with tyrants series. I want to point everybody back to that, so I'll link that in the comments when we post this. So I want to say thank
Very.
you for coming back, and thanks to the audience for tolerating the technical issues that we adapt and we overcome as our military
Yep.
does.
Yep.
Jerry, any closing words for us?
Oh, Mike, I wish I had something. I think if I say anything else, I'll just look stupid. So
I'm in the
I'll
club.
just leave it. I'll
All
leave
right,
it
we'll
at
do.
that.
All right, Jerry,
But
thank
I
you. You have a
enjoyed it,
great
Mike,
rest of your
and
day.
thank you.
All right,
All right.
bye-bye.
Thank you, Mike. Enjoyed it. Bye bye now.